Now, so Minja is here, and let me introduce her very briefly, although you know her very well. Of course, she has spent a life in heritage. And something on human rights before, right?
Yes.
So you qualify for this connection, human rights and heritage. Then I worked at Heritage Center for many, many years, and then in India, director of the the office of UNESCO in India. And then she came back and she was elevated to the rank of president of the chief rival University of Cottbus, which is the Leuven School. So you are the two. Now you can play soccer if you want.
Yes. She'll win.
Before you go into a war, play soccer.
Play sport, play soccer together.
So,
Just a couple of seconds.
and of course, Minja has always been working on this issue of development, cultural development, sustainability. That's been, in fact, if I remember when I came, she was the one that was pushing for this before and beyond, the rigidities of other organisms that we don't mention here.
Yes, we don't mention here.
So, you have a PowerPoint?
Yes, I do have a
Okay.
PowerPoint. Hello, good afternoon. I made it. I thought you had forgotten me and left me in the conference, but anyway, I'm here. And I absolutely wanted to show you this because I stayed up till 3 o'clock this morning to prepare slides. But now I have too many slides, too many pictures, but photos, I'm very, yeah. So you have to now, I'm going to have to show you 4 slides a minute, right?
Okay.
So is that it? How do I do this?
Forward, backward.
UNESCO by Nuria Zans.
Huh?
There is a record in UNESCO by Nuria Zans.
100?
No, it's like 280 slides a minute.
A minute, so that's really fast, yeah. No, it's just that I'm very bad, and I didn't have any students last night who would slave and do these PowerPoints for me, so I had to do it myself, cutting and pasting and squeezing photos. So anyway, thank you very much, Marie-Thérèse, for inviting me. Francesco had said that we were rivals, but we were friends way before. So when the Cottbus course began, I remember you invited me to lecture here. And so I think we should now look into more collaboration among the UNESCO chairs. And since there are several here, it's good. Okay, so the topic that I was asked to speak on was on culture and moving the MDGs to the post-2015 Sustainable Development Agenda. Now, I actually got into this because I was asked to write a paper for the United Cities and Local Governments, UCLG, and then it took me such a long time to do the research, so I'm now kind of reusing a lot of the stuff. So, okay, as was introduced, I'm now with the Le Maire Center. They elevated me to be the president after being professor there. I took early retirement from UNESCO after 30 years in the UN, and I was at the center for 11 years. So let's just, I think you all know the 8 points of the Millennium Development Goals, but just think, how can you approach poverty and hunger without looking at the cultural dimension? I mean, how do people eat? And how do people live? And what is your notion of poverty if it is not somehow culturally related? And then primary education. I mean, you go to school, you don't go to school, the girls go, the boys go. It's also very much culturally linked. And then gender equality, and child mortality, maternity health, HIV, AIDS, and other forms of disease. These are all intimately linked with culture. I mean, it's just a way of life. And the environmental sustainability, in which a lot of our heritage things has always been in the MDGs. We've slipped in historic centers and heritage preservation, a lot of it under the point number 7 on environmental sustainability. So then the question is, I mean, how do you define development? Because even the MDG, the critiques over MDGs, there's been a lot of papers over the last, I think, 5 years. People have spent time looking and reviewing the success or the failures of the MDG. And most of the many papers that I've read say the actual problem of the MDGs was that it was too sectorial. I mean, again, everything was in a silo. So we have always said that you have to look into the cultural dimension of things. And so how is the post-2015 development agenda? Francesco, tell me, I think it's evolved since I was looking at it. But when I was dealing with it, about a month ago? No, 6 months ago, or maybe it was even a year. It was very much thematic. It was more like a strategy, operational mode, rather than sectorial. So themes like leave no one behind, like in terms of inclusive development, or put sustainable development at the core. Transform economies for jobs and inclusive growth. Forge a new partnership. This forge a new global partnership is a little bit dangerous in a way, because while the MDGs was very much oriented towards governments, it was all these 8 points that the UN and the international community as a whole sort of pushed onto different governments. And the governments, as members of the United Nations, took on sort of engagement to apply the MDGs in its various forms through their different national mechanisms. But this post-2015 development agenda really calls upon greater participation of the civil society, and as well as, of course, a scientific and academic. There is a recognition, at least in the blah blah so far, that there is a need to approach the academic and the scientific world to the elected officials, especially in the context of the decentralization, that the local authorities who are actually in the front line of implementation need to be supported by research and all that. And as we all know, we have a lot of difficulties in getting the politicians to listen to us. And of course, politicians also say we don't have enough money to do research. So why not create that synergy that everybody needs? So, but on the one hand, but this, I think this post-2015 agenda is very much also driven by the fact that governments can't do everything. I mean, it's a complete recognition that central governments cannot do everything, especially in a world where there is decentralization. So let's quickly look through, as you all know this by heart, that for UNESCO, the definition of culture is that it's distinctive spiritual, material, intellectual, and emotional features of society or a social group, and that it encompasses, in addition to art and literature, lifestyles, way of living together, value systems, traditions, and beliefs, noting that culture is at the heart of contemporary debates about identity, social cohesion, and the development of a knowledge-based economy. So I think that if you really think about this passage, which comes from the Declaration of Cultural Diversity, you realize that culture is not only a sector of activity, but it is above all a cross-cutting importance. So thanks to Francesco, I think that we've really, UNESCO has had several attempts to put culture in development, but it was like forgotten. Like in so many UN agencies, there's a huge subject and then it's forgotten, and then fortunately Francesco really came and picked it up. And so Florence Hanju, the UN General Assembly, I mean, I'm sure that he will be able to tell us tales and tales about different humiliating experiences of people like not paying attention to culture, the dark side of, everybody loves culture, but nobody wants to listen to us, So of course, the cultural dimension of development, the culture-based sustainable development, all of these sort of phrases have come up over the history of UNESCO. And I think one of the things that I think was good was in UNESCO helped create a cultural committee within the United Cities and local governments and adopted something called the Local Agenda 21 for Culture. But this is, sorry, it's a really bad photo, but I wanted to say that while we think about this, well, let's just be realistic. Let's stop being hypocritical. This comes from the Milan Expo 2015, and the Zero Pavilion was a very good pavilion, in which they really talk about the food security issue of production, distribution, and waste. And they had this impressive room of like stock exchange of all these commodities, wheat, rice, everything, ting. And these, I draw your attention to the two little slides there, that, and that these international prices affect, local food prices are affected by international prices. Their money buys less. And needless to re-mention again, the proliferation of rice seeds that could no longer be planted, I don't want to mention names, but like this famous Monte Santo. And so when you talk about poverty, we are talking about huge amounts of food being wasted. And then we talk about poverty alleviation. I mean, let's stop to think about the nature of our economy, you know. I mean, I don't want to sound like some whatever. But anyway, also as we talk about sustainable mobility, so much blah, blah. How much does the UN or the international community waste in terms of conferences all over the world talking about sustainability, sustainable mobility, et cetera, when just switch on your television every night, and how many car advertisements do you see? With, like 0 interest rate. Everybody's still trying to sell cars, but now we are stuck in this problem because if you reduce the car industry, there'll be more unemployment. But so we have to find, our politicians really have to find a way to rethink the world economy and the nature of our economy before that. So this issue of the soft transport versus the car industry, the reality of the car industry is something that we really have to think about. Huh? And also, we now, as you know, the world agrees that the urban sprawl, the extension of cities, first of all, let's not forget that I think by 2050, 66 or 70% of the world population is going to become urban, and the majority of them will be in Asia and Africa. I think, 90% of the new 2.5 billion new citadins will be in Asia and Africa. So we talk about dense cities now because we don't want the cities sprawling out and taking up more and more land. So we talk about densification of cities and compact cities and things like that. But, I mean, is this the only alternative? High-rises or slums? I mean, there are lots of other experiences that we know from human settlements from all over the world, traditional human settlements. And then also this rural-urban migration and immigration. I was with UN High Commissioner for Refugees for 10 years before joining UNESCO. And there, you're really in the heart of cultural identity and conflict. I mean, the refugee movement is really very much about that. So here I just took some, photos, and those are my kids, because I think there's something wonderful about kids, about mixing up races. And so, of course, the cultural dimension of water management, this whole thing of the Oriental despot you've all heard about it all comes at the question of the water management. In many countries, the control of water is a source of great power, but it's also a source of social cohesion. I mean, countries like India have made wonderful monuments with water because they celebrate water, But then, again, so we have to think about how these traditional water systems can be compatible with modern systems. Every time I've traveled in developing countries, every time I see a faucet, it's always leaking. Whereas if there are other traditional systems, I think it can be compatible. I don't think that modern piped water system still can go everywhere. So I think that until such time, I think that there should be a system of compatibility. So again, this is, how do we take these realities? Are we taking these realities as threats, or can we look at opportunities of it? So I think that the thing that we have to really bear in mind is that this rural-urban migration is not going to stop. And it's not just within a country. Developing countries, the so-called rural part of the world, are all going to come into the urban part of the world. Look at all the drama taking place today in Europe, and it's been going on forever in so many continents. And globalization is also a process that cannot be stopped, and decentralization, fortunately, political decentralization is taking place. And governance at the lowest level of the government is supposed to be closest to the people. So, but decentralization, without the decentralization of knowledge, without the decentralization of funding and of especially knowledge, will be a disaster. So, it's really governance by persuasion and through partnerships. And this agenda, the post-2015 agenda, focuses a lot on these new forms of partnerships. So again, just a quick reminder, what do we mean about conservation, right? I mean, it's beyond objects now, right? It's really, if we get the process of conservation correct, we're talking about a proactive environmental protection, long-term maintenance strategy, sustainability, community participation, heritage interpretation, human development. This is where we're going to. And behind all of this, of course, as a local agenda 21, Again, to mention that international standards and norms need to be understood and implemented by the local authorities. So we have to work very much with local authorities. And so just a quick reminder, I know that the committee adopted the 5 Cs instead of the 3 Ps at the time, remember? But for us, the 3 Ps was principles, and these principles were supposed to be all these international norms. And the second P was supposed to be programs, and the third P was supposed to be partnerships. So, it's the 5 Cs and the 3 Ps, I think, are perfectly compatible. But just again, a quick thing of, UNESCO, it's got not just the World Heritage Convention, but there's a Declaration 2001, Declaration Cultural Diversity, Intangible Heritage, Diversity of Cultural Expressions, and a whole series of very interesting UNESCO recommendations, which I think are very interesting. And the last of which, Francesco had a huge part, and our late colleague, Ron Valor, on the historic urban landscape, and we call it the Hull approach, because this is but just a reminder of some of the ones on public works. I think this is a very good recommendation if you haven't seen it, on public and private works. And then, of course, contemporary role of historic areas, and the national level protection, it's not just World Heritage, and of course, other international norms of the ICOMOS charters, for example. And the historic urban landscape approach. This is a photo from Amber. Yeah, it's just outside of Jaipur, Amber. And then where we are, in fact, working on trying to create a new town extension, but without harming that link between the incredible fort. Okay, quickly. So let's not forget, this is why I always tell everybody that the most important part of the World Heritage Convention is Article 5. And is to integrate the protection of heritage into comprehensive planning of programs. So this is an opportunity. This is something that the World Heritage Committee can use. I mean, in fact, we should all be using that as a development agenda, right? As a development strategy. So this was after Habitat 2 in 1996. Nobody did anything about Istanbul. So we started having a project in 1996. And the UNESCO's contribution to Habitat 2 was the motto, humanize the city. It's to make it more human. It's not just about, the official slogan was shelter for all. But in fact, shelter for all means what? I mean, you have to humanize the city. So we started this project in Asia because I was in charge of Asia. And of course, the contradiction of development and conservation was really played out in Asia. So, and then we worked on this and there's different kinds of declaration, but this is just like a conference declaration. Because after the Nara Declaration on Authenticity that you're all aware about, we wanted in the same place in Nara to further the discussion on the notion of integrity. So we had a meeting with, Herb Stovall at the time, Yuka, and it was a so-called expert meeting, but people from different cities, local authorities came, on the notion of the integrity as applied to historic cities. Okay, understanding, analysis, sustainability, and equity. So you have to look at how to make this happen. And this is the process. This is the process between the actors and the factors and how you do this. So we also did with China, remember? We went to Suzhou, that was fun, wasn't it, with cities of China. And then it was really good because thanks to your work afterwards, and many, many mayors that I saw later said, oh, we really regret having demolished our historic area, And so then, it's they kind of recreated them in China. Okay, so these are again some of the work that we've done, in India, because there's a lot of pressure for standards, national standards, safety standards, that we set up the Indian Heritage Cities Network. But now we're very happy that the Prime Minister Modi has declared a new program called Hiriday, which is a multi-million dollar thing. Again, this is just a process of how do you identify your local assets, and then you have to do planning. Remember Article 5 of the World Heritage Convention, you have to make these. And about coming back to the MDGs, the health. I mean, how you have to make public population awareness, public awareness through culturally sensitive heritage education. This is from Laos. And then to make public works, and then the 5 Cs. Again, why conserve? Current and future challenges, conservation concerns, a question of why conserve, what to conserve, how to conserve, and for whom do we conserve. Let's not forget this. A heritage for knowledge-based tourism. Tourism is a form of education for us. And all these now jobs for employment. And one of the most fabulous things to do when you're abroad is to go shopping. Is to go and find a local product. And we don't want to see everything made in China or made in India. We'd like to see also local product, and also in India and in China to find traditional skills being maintained. So ensuring livelihoods through small business. I've been involved in many, many renovations of old markets, spontaneous markets into, like better, but not shopping malls. We want to just improve public spaces to have things. So here we've been organizing study tours for Indian and Chinese and also Turkish visitors coming to Europe. And that's been fun. And even notions of, like, in Europe, a lot of the historic cities have been revived thanks to the social housing policies. But especially in countries like India, it's very feasible to do that. So some of the district administrators have come and studied the economics of how to do it, and it's been really good. So focus on, so that's my last. So from its evolving concept of heritage, as enshrined in the operational guidelines of the World Heritage Convention, can really be a tool for sustainable development. Thank you.
So, first of all,